They appeared to be the very embodiment of innocence, joy, and the perfect family dynamic. But fame has a way of concealing its deepest cracks. While the Partridge Family captured the hearts of millions, behind the scenes, one star was slowly pulling away, not because of pride, but due to pain. Fans were stunned when Susan Dey declined to join the Partridge Family reunion, and the reason lay with one of her co-stars. But who, and why? America's Sweetheart emerges in 1970. In 1970, American television underwent a major transformation when 17-year-old Susan Dey, a former model with minimal acting experience, was cast as Lori Partridge in the Partridge Family. Practically unknown at the time, Dey's striking looks and natural screen charisma made her an instant star. Her portrayal of Lori Partridge was graceful and charming, drawing viewers week after week. Her image of youthful innocence resonated across generations. Teen girls admired her energy and purity, while parents saw in her the ideal daughter. The show, centered around a musical family traveling in a brightly colored bus, became an instant hit. Merchandise featuring the show's branding and Dey's face sold rapidly. Songs from the show topped charts, and each episode drew massive audiences. Virtually overnight, the Partridges became a pop culture phenomenon, and Susan Dey's likeness adorned magazine covers, posters, and millions of fans' walls. But while the world embraced her as the fresh-faced girl next door, reality painted a far more complicated picture. Behind the camera, Susan's meteoric rise was no fairy tale. The fame, attention, and relentless expectations placed a quiet but immense pressure on her. The sweet and composed Lori Partridge seen on screen masked the growing emotional strain of a young girl grappling with the harsh realities of fame. The public adored her, but few knew the toll it was taking. As the applause grew louder, so did the internal struggle. Although the Partridge Family was celebrated for its humor, heartwarming music, and cheerful adventures, its behind-the-scenes dynamic was far more complex. The set became a space where ambition, adolescence, and unspoken emotional turmoil quietly coexisted. For the young stars suddenly thrust into celebrity status, life was no longer private. Every move was observed, every emotion magnified, and every imperfection scrutinized. Despite gossip and rumors, David Cassidy, Susan's co-star and the show's breakout star, later stated that there was no major infighting among the cast. He maintained they were like a real family. Cassidy specifically noted his close bonds with Shirley Jones, his on-screen mother, Danny Bonaduce, his mischievous little brother, and Susan Dey, whom he described not just as a castmate, but as a trusted confidant. Yet even genuine affection could not shield them from the emotional toll of growing up in the limelight. As the cast rode the wave of their success, they also battled private emotions familiar to most teenagers, hormonal changes, secret crushes, and the loneliness that often comes with being idolized. Dey herself admitted in later years that the intensity of their fame sometimes made it difficult to form real, lasting bonds. Over time, the closeness the cast once shared began to fade, with subtle rifts forming beneath the surface. One such rift was the complicated relationship between Susan Dey and David Cassidy. On screen, they were the perfect siblings, but off-screen, tension between the two grew. As their popularity surged, so did the competition. Fans adored both, but the pressure to maintain their public personas brought strain. While Dey's star steadily ascended, Cassidy's fame was both a gift and a curse. Their relationship, increasingly scrutinized, became harder to navigate privately. Dey's introspective personality clashed with Cassidy's more outgoing nature. While she struggled with being boxed into the image of Lori Partridge, Cassidy seemed to thrive on the attention. These contrasting approaches began to strain their rapport. The cracks in their on-screen chemistry became increasingly apparent behind closed doors, though never publicly acknowledged at the time. Unspoken frustrations and emotional dissonance simmered just beneath the glossy surface. In time, these buried feelings resurfaced, as each cast member processed the aftershocks of their sudden fame. Though Susan Dey would always be remembered as Lori Partridge, the weight of that role often eclipsed her true self. She wasn't just a teen icon, she was a young woman trying to understand herself amidst fame, family, and personal identity. A complicated bond. As the Partridge Family faded into TV history, the emotional ties between Susan Dey and David Cassidy remained complicated, poignant, and unresolved. Over time, Susan's feelings toward David deepened in ways that surprised even her. It wasn't a simple teen crush, it was more nuanced, shaped by shared experiences and emotional vulnerability. While Cassidy enjoyed the devotion of countless fans, effortlessly embodying the teen idol role, Dey found herself emotionally tethered to him. They shared quiet conversations between scenes, inside jokes, and moments that transcended their scripted roles. Watching him become a superstar, Dey's admiration grew into something deeper. However, David, ever aware of his celebrity and the dangers of romantic entanglements, kept a deliberate distance. The show's wholesome image discouraged any on-set romance, especially between its stars. David, confident and charismatic in public, was also cautious and protective of his private life, especially when it came to Susan. She wasn't just a colleague, she was young, impressionable, and emotionally exposed. Despite trying to suppress them, Susan's feelings quietly flourished. She saw in David not just a co-star but someone she respected and emotionally connected with in a profound way. Yet, as the Partridge Family hurtled through tours, press events, and endless demands to present the image of a perfect musical family, Susan's private longing remained hidden, buried beneath fame and obligation. Even though David often teased and flirted with her playfully, a true emotional connection between them remained just out of reach. David never allowed their relationship to cross into anything romantic, as he later confessed he found it easier to maintain a certain distance, mindful of how their connection could complicate the public image the show was desperately trying to uphold. For Susan, this emotional distance was both painful and confusing, a burden she struggled to articulate even as it weighed heavily on her heart. The rejection was never explicitly stated but was felt in the silence that lingered around their interactions over the years. Susan Dey's feelings for David remained locked inside, unspoken, unresolved, and buried beneath the crushing weight of fame and the expectations placed upon them both. It was a silent wound, one that Susan didn't know how to address at the time. She channeled her heartbreak into her performances, crafting a public persona that appeared composed and poised while, internally, she wrestled with the complexities of unrequited love. Though her relationship with David Cassidy was never fully realized, it defined much of her early adult life, a bond filled with longing but never returned. In the years that followed, as Susan tried to distance herself from the pressure of being forever associated with Laurie Partridge, she buried her feelings for David deep inside. Yet, that hidden heartache never completely faded. The revelation that changed everything came with the passing years, as the Partridge Family became a nostalgic relic of television history. The actors who once played those iconic characters began seeking new paths in their lives. For Susan Dey, this meant stepping away from Laurie Partridge to carve out a respected career in television and film. She moved on to roles in more serious and mature productions, far removed from the lighthearted sitcom that had made her famous. David Cassidy, however, continued to be tied to his past, with his career revolving around the legacy of his teen idol status, despite his personal struggles. In 2007, Cassidy chose to reveal his version of the past in his autobiography Could It Be Forever? Within its pages, he shared his experiences during the peak of his fame, detailing relationships with co-stars, fans, and the internal struggles that came with being a teen heartthrob. But one particular revelation sent shockwaves through readers and those involved in the story. Cassidy admitted that, during their time on the Partridge Family, he and Susan had once spent the night together. The brief encounter was described in vague terms, but it seemed to haunt Cassidy as much as it shaped their relationship. For Susan, however, this wasn't just a fleeting moment in a book, it was a betrayal. A violation of trust that would forever change the dynamic between them. Susan, who had spent years distancing herself from her Partridge Family persona and the emotional scars of her youth, was blindsided by Cassidy's words. Over the years since the show ended, she had built a life independent of the public's perception of her. She had moved beyond her role as Laurie Partridge and the quiet pain of unrequited love for David. But now, a deeply personal and vulnerable moment from her past, one she had never shared with the world, was thrust into the public eye without her consent. Cassidy's confession wasn't an apology, nor an attempt to rebuild their relationship. Instead, it was a sensationalized story, inserted into a memoir full of tales of fame and fortune. For Susan, it wasn't merely a breach of privacy, it felt like a painful violation of a part of her life she had hoped to keep buried forever. In the years that followed, Susan's silence spoke louder than any words could. She did not publicly respond to Cassidy's revelations or attempt to correct the narrative that had been created. But her refusal to engage, her absence from reunion shows and interviews, made it clear that a friendship with David Cassidy was no longer possible. The wound that had once been buried deep within her was now exposed for the world to see, and it could never be healed. The line that had been crossed between them could never be undone, and Susan Day's silence was the clearest message she could send. After the show ended in 1974, Susan found herself at a crossroads. While the world still saw her as Lori Partridge, she was determined to prove she was more than just a TV star. She wanted to escape the confines of typecasting and create a new career path where she would be recognized for her talent rather than her past. She found that path when she landed the role of Grace Van Owen on LA Law, a groundbreaking legal drama that premiered in the mid-1980s. As a seasoned attorney, Grace was a stark contrast to the innocent, tuneful Lori Partridge. Susan's portrayal of Grace earned her widespread acclaim and several prestigious awards, including a Golden Globe. This marked a significant turning point in her career. She was no longer just a nostalgic figure from a bygone era, she had become a respected actress, celebrated for her complex and multifaceted roles. In the 1990s, when nostalgia for the Partridge Family reached new heights, Susan's absence became more noticeable. As TV specials and reunion shows were being discussed, the demand for a reunion grew. VH1 and ABC both explored the idea of bringing the cast back together. Fans of the show rallied for a reunion, flooding message boards and fan clubs with petitions. The timing seemed perfect, the original cast members were available, the audience was eager, and nostalgia for the show was at its peak. While some of the original cast members expressed varying degrees of interest, Susan Day remained silent. No interviews, no public statements, no reflections on the past. In the world of celebrity reunions, where many stars embraced the chance to cash in on nostalgia, Susan's refusal to engage stood out. Her silence was deafening, a sharp contrast to the voices of her former co-stars. For Susan, The Partridge Family was far more than just a sitcom, it represented a time in her life that had shaped her, for better or worse. Her decision to remain silent and refuse any reunion was her way of regaining control over a narrative that had long been defined by others. It wasn't about avoiding nostalgia for the sake of it, but about safeguarding her dignity, her privacy, and her peace. The true reason behind her refusal to participate in a Partridge Family reunion, the untold story, was more complicated and deeply personal than anyone first understood. Those close to the production had whispered for years about the real reason for her absence, and it all centered around one person, David Cassidy. While some believed her silence stemmed from simple disinterest or personal preference, those who knew Susan better recognized that her decision was rooted in the betrayal she felt from him. The wound had festered over time, growing deeper with each passing year. This wasn't just about old hurt feelings or fading memories from their time together on set. It was a betrayal that reached far beyond the boundaries of a failed romance. It was a breach of trust, a rift in their once fragile relationship. One former associate, speaking anonymously, summed up the anger and pain with brutal honesty: "He's an evil piece of." Those words reflected years of unresolved bitterness and pain. But it wasn't just the heartbreak of a failed romance that had created this chasm between them. It wasn't a simple case of unrequited love or a youthful crush gone sour. No, the resentment was deeper, rooted in broken trust, a violation of personal privacy, and the crossing of a line that should have been sacred. And that line had been crossed by Cassidy, who unapologetically exposed it to the world. The release of David Cassidy's autobiography shattered Susan's world in ways no one could have predicted. In its pages, Cassidy casually mentioned a night they had spent together, an event that, in his eyes, seemed insignificant. But for Susan, it was a betrayal that exposed her to the public in a way that could never be undone. What had once been a private, intimate moment shared between them was now something for the world to scrutinize. The trust and vulnerability she had placed in him were exploited, and Cassidy never acknowledged the pain he had caused. The true betrayal wasn't the physical encounter, but the way he trivialized it, turning it into a spectacle to serve his narrative. For Susan, attending any reunion would have been a hypocritical act. It would have meant standing next to the very man who had humiliated her in the most public way possible. To pretend everything was fine, to ignore the broken trust that had destroyed their relationship, would have been a betrayal of her own integrity. So, Susan chose silence. She chose to remain absent, prioritizing her integrity over the false idea of a reunion. It was a much harder path, but in the end, she kept her dignity intact. She had no desire to revisit the past for anyone's sake, especially not for the man who had damaged their bond beyond repair. When David Cassidy passed away on November 21, 2017, the world was flooded with nostalgia and sorrow. To millions, he was still the charming teen idol from the Partridge Family, the heartthrob who captured the hearts of fans. Social media exploded with tributes, photos, and messages of grief. He was remembered not only for his fame but for the joy he had brought into the lives of his admirers. Amid this outpouring of collective mourning, however, one notable silence stood out: Susan Dey. The actress who once played his sister, Laurie Partridge, offered no public words of tribute, no emotional interviews, no recognition of his death. Her silence was deafening. It wasn't a lapse or a result of lingering anger, it was a deliberate, calculated decision. Susan had long kept her distance from the past, a past tainted by personal betrayals and hidden heartaches. So, she chose to mourn privately, far from the public eye. While others gathered to remember David's life, Susan quietly withdrew, maintaining the boundary she had so fiercely protected, the boundary that Cassidy had crossed, either unknowingly or carelessly, in ways that still haunted her. As the years went on, the dream of a Partridge Family reunion persisted in the hearts of fans. There were speculations, rumors, and even official attempts to bring the cast together again. Specials and documentaries were made, and fans clamored for the moment when the beloved cast would reunite and stand together once more, just as they had in the 1970s. But as time went on, that reunion never materialized. Although the world caught glimpses of the cast through various specials and anniversary events, the one reunion everyone hoped for, the complete gathering of all surviving members, never came to pass. Among the missing faces was Susan Dey. She had made the decision to remain apart from the nostalgic gatherings that swept up her former co-stars. Many speculated about her absence, wondering why she had chosen not to join in while so many others had embraced the reunion. For Susan, the answer was simple: she wasn't interested in reliving the past, especially a past that had caused her so much pain. For her, the Partridge Family was a chapter she had closed long ago. The show's legacy, its fans, and the reunion projects only served as painful reminders of a time that hadn't healed for her, a time when her personal suffering was glossed over for the sake of entertainment. Her choice to remain absent wasn't a rejection of the love her fans had shown her, it was a subtle but powerful statement. Some things, some wounds, are best left untouched. They are better left behind, tucked away in the quiet corners of the past. Susan Dey's refusal to return to the spotlight wasn't about denying the past. It was about affirming the importance of personal peace. She had created a life far from the echoes of her former fame, a life where she was in control of her own story. In a world obsessed with nostalgia, reunions, and the idea of a perfect closure, Susan Dey showed us that sometimes, the greatest lesson is to leave the past where it belongs, behind us. Have you ever been betrayed by someone, with a secret revealed for the whole world to see? How would you feel if it were made public on such a grand scale? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.